Okay, Layla, you ready? That was a big sigh. I wonder if you heard that. Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. A couple of disclaimers before we start. As always, I am not an expert. Please do not quote me on anything I've said in this video. I have linked all the sources that I use for the information in this video in the description below. I am very new at this, so any feedback you have is very much appreciated. That also means I'm not very good at this, so please be kind to me. Today's audio might sound a little different for a plethora of reasons. One, I'm using the camera mic today. I just want to see if I like the vibe of that better. Also, my family is watching TV in the other room, so I might be talking quieter or you might hear sounds from them. And as always, Layla's here and she is licking herself. Today we are going to be talking about the trial of Alex Murdaugh. This is probably the trial of the century. Not the trial of the century, but at least the trial of this year so far. And what we're going to be talking about goes way beyond this trial itself. And this is like a very tangled web of murder and theft and lies and deceit. And it is going to be a little bit hard to follow at first, but I promise by the end of this video, you will understand where I'm coming from and it will be worth your time. This is true crime at its finest. To make things a little bit easier to understand, we're going to be breaking down today's video into 5 parts. First, we're going to talk about who are the Murdaughs, who is the family we are talking about in this case. Then we are going to be talking about Alex Murdaugh a little bit, the one who's on trial and what he is on trial for. Next, we'll discuss the other crimes that Alex Murdaugh has either confessed to or people believe he's committed. Then we're going to discuss the other deaths that are mysteriously linked to the Murdaugh family. And lastly, we're going to talk about what this all means and where we go from here. So as long as Layla's ready, Layla, this is not bath time. This is camera time. Layla, she's not even paying attention to me.
Can you please stop licking yourself? It's not appropriate to do that on camera. You're so cute.
And I guess the one line for this story is Alex Murdaugh is or was a prominent South Carolina lawyer who is now on trial for the murders of his wife and son. But it's really much more than that. Okay, and now I will be explaining all the more than that part of that sentence. So in order to understand this case, you need to understand the importance of the name Murdaugh. Alex Murdaugh is pronounced Alex Murdaugh, but if you were to pronounce it phonetically, it would be Alex Murdaugh. He comes from a long line of lawyers in the Low Country region of South Carolina. So all of the Murdaughs before Alex were named solicitor of the Low Country in South Carolina, which is essentially the top prosecutor. In some regions, you might be called the county prosecutor. And fun fact, the Murdaughs had the longest stretch of family control in any judicial circuit in the history of the United States. So this family was a pretty big deal. Granted, the Low Country is a relatively small region in the United States, so I feel like this is a perfect example of a big fish in a small pond. Or to push that analogy further, 4 big fish who are all related to each other in a small pond. Alex Murdaugh himself was never named solicitor. He was, by some accounts, the volunteer solicitor, and other accounts, the assistant solicitor to his father, Randolph Murdaugh. But Randolph Murdaugh actually passed away 3 days after the murders of Alex's wife and son. So by the time that Alex would have taken over the solicitorship from his father, all of this drama was happening, and you know, I'm sure you can hear everything that is happening out there, and I am so sorry, but this is the only time I have to record. So let's talk a little bit more about the details of this case and the trial. On June 7th, 2021, Alex Murdaugh called 911 around 10 p.m. to report that his wife Maggie and his son Paul had been shot. Alex's theory from the very beginning was that he told investigators that his son had been receiving threats for a boat accident that he had allegedly caused, and that his wife and son were killed in retaliation to said boat accident. More on that in a little bit. 2 long guns were used in the killing. A different gun was used to kill Paul than it was to kill Maggie. The defense has argued that it's not possible for a single person to carry 2 long guns on them at once, and they believe that 2 shooters were present. Alex Murdaugh was believed to be at the scene of the crime as it occurred or right before it occurred, based on cell phone video that his son Paul took right before prosecutors believe the murders took place. Another interesting tidbit when it comes to this case is there was a video of Alex Murdaugh also shot by his son earlier in the day where he's wearing a white shirt. And by the time police arrived at the scene, Alex Murdaugh was wearing a blue shirt. The white shirt he was wearing right before his wife and son were murdered has not been located. So some people think, well, maybe the white shirt was disposed of because maybe there was some evidence on it linking him to the crime, but I don't know. There is no DNA evidence in this case, so this trial is purely based on circumstantial evidence. And then we've got a lot of digital evidence like phone records, when phones were locked, when phones were active, how many steps were tracked by people's phones, GPS technology. This trial has been super interesting, and if you want to know more about the ins and outs of it, I do recommend you head over to Law and Crime, their YouTube channel. I'm a big fan. That's where I've gotten a lot of information about this case. The first officer arrived at the scene within 20 minutes of Alex's phone call, but investigators, because it was the Low Country in South Carolina, state investigators didn't arrive at the scene till a few hours later. And there has been a lot of criticism as to how investigators handled this case. Some of the criticism comes from the fact that the Murdaughs, their ties to the police force and investigators in general ran very deep, but also it seems to some people that some mistakes were made in the initial collection of evidence at the crime scene. So before all the investigators got there, Alec was able to contact some family and friends, and they were roaming the property. Something that's important to note about this crime scene, the crimes occurred at the kennels that the family had for dogs. The Murdaugh family, if it's not clear, they were very wealthy. They had a huge property with the ability to hunt and fish, and they had multiple homes. These particular murders occurred at the dog kennels. So family and friends were walking around the property. They were there to comfort Alec. Before the investigators got there, someone decided to cover the bodies with a bed sheet, which obviously some bodily fluids and potentially some DNA was then put on that bed sheet. That bed sheet was disposed of. It was not collected by investigators. Alex Murdaugh's brother has actually testified that a couple days after the murders took place, he was the one to clean up the remains of Paul Murdaugh, Alec's son. Paul and Maggie were both shot multiple times, but Paul specifically, trigger warning, discussing gross things. Paul's brains were out and about on the lawn, and Alec's brother has testified that he cleaned that up, which is completely unheard of. There was also rain falling at this time intermittently between when the murders happened and when investigators got at the scene, so that's potentially washing away evidence as well. And when state agents did arrive, they decided to send Alex Murdaugh and his little entourage he had back to the family house on the same property. The house wasn't named as part of the crime scene. Witnesses have testified that no one decided to search the house for a potential murder weapon or evidence or maybe a suspect that happened to be hiding there. And Alex Murdaugh wasn't indicted for the murder of his wife and son for another year. The murder weapons have never been recovered, and as I mentioned previously, no DNA evidence was found at the scene. As for the trial itself, Alex Murdaugh did take the stand in his own defense. During his testimony, he confessed to a bunch of other crimes he has committed, which I will get to in a second, but he was steadfast in the fact that he did not kill his wife and son. Alec also admitted that he lied to investigators for 20 months, that he was not at the scene of the crime the night the murders were committed. But as I mentioned earlier, there was a video tying Alec to the scene. So prosecutors allege that Alex Murdaugh murdered his wife and son as a sort of diversion from the other crimes he was committing. Alex Murdaugh testified on the stand that he stole millions of dollars from some of his clients, and the same day that Maggie and Paul were murdered, Alec had been confronted by his law firm about missing funds. So prosecutors are attempting to draw a straight line from being confronted by the law firm to eventually killing his wife and son, which does seem like a little bit of a stretch to some people. Alex Murdaugh has also said that he has been addicted to opioids for over 20 years and that the money from his clients essentially went to fuel his addiction. But also, I mean, just Google the Murdaugh properties. He led a very lavish lifestyle, so there's no telling where that money went. So outside of the murder case, Alex Murdaugh is facing 99 financial charges, including but not limited to money laundering, theft, tax evasion, and insurance fraud. So the fact that he admitted these openly on the stand while he was testifying is a really big deal, because even if he doesn't get convicted for the murders of his wife and son, he's probably going to spend his life in prison for admitting to all of these financial crimes in court. Part of the reason a lot of people are speculating that Alec would admit to these crimes in court is because he wanted to prove to the jury that even though he's been super dishonest in the past, he lied to his clients, he stole money from them, he lied to investigators for almost 2 years about what happened the night of the murders. He's trying to prove that he's not lying about the fact that he murdered his wife and son. He's trying to pull the like, I'm telling the whole truth right now because I am under oath. And before I was addicted to opioids and now I'm not. I've been in rehab and now I can finally tell the truth. So we'll see what the jury thinks about that. Just as the prosecution is trying to sell this narrative of a cause and effect of the law firm confronted him about the missing funds as the cause, and then Alex Murdaugh murdered his wife and son as the effect, we also saw that the day after he was fired by his law firm for all these alleged crimes, Alex Murdaugh himself was shot. So this was about 3 months after Maggie and Paul were murdered. Alex Murdaugh called 911. He was on the side of the road. He said he had just been shot. Someone was trying to kill him, that he was shot in the head. We now know that the person who shot him was a former client of his named Curtis Eddie Smith. Curtis Eddie Smith is also a very distant cousin of Alex Murdaugh, so you might hear people refer to him as Cousin Eddie. Alex Murdaugh has now said on the stand, he's now testified to the fact that he had asked Curtis Eddie Smith to shoot and kill him so that his only surviving son, Buster is the older of Alex's 2 sons, Buster and then Paul, so that Buster could receive the $10 million payout from Alex's life insurance policy. Now, Curtis Eddie Smith has said this is not actually what happened. Some people believe that Alec was actually trying to frame Curtis Eddie Smith for the murders of his wife and son. At the end of the day, all this speculation, it doesn't really matter because right now Alex Murdaugh is on trial for the murders of his wife and son. That's the only thing we really should be focusing on. But the truth of the matter is, it's hard to focus on just those 2 deaths when there have been 3 other deaths in the last decade that have been tied to the Murdaugh family. So the first death that people are tracing back to the Murdaughs was the death of 19-year-old Stephen Smith in 2015. On July 8th, 2015, the body of 19-year-old Stephen Smith was found in the middle of the road in Hampton County, which is where the Murdaughs live. A little bit about Stephen Smith: he was openly gay. He was one of the only openly gay people in their area. He was going to nursing school and he eventually wanted to become a doctor. His body was just laying in the middle of the road, no car to be found, and he had severe head trauma. His death was ultimately ruled a hit and run, but some investigators say that there's no evidence of a hit and run. There was no glass, there was no debris from a car, there was no bumper. It's also very weird for a hit and run for all the trauma to be done directly to someone's head. Stephen's shoes were loosely around his feet and they were still on. Some people believe that if he was actually hit by a car, they would have flown off. There would have been some kind of damage done to his clothing. And then Stephen's car was found about 3 miles down the road and the gas tank was open and it was empty. So some people believe that Stephen was probably walking to go get gas and then he got hit by a car. But now we've learned that the closest gas station was actually in the opposite direction. So even though his death was ruled a hit and run, there's definitely some mystery to it. Another important thing about the death of Stephen Smith is there were rumors that Stephen Smith and Alex Murdaugh's older son Buster were seeing each other. And again, these are just rumors, there's no evidence to this, but the running theory, and again, this is a theory, is that Stephen Smith called Buster the night of the murder to help him get gas, and maybe Buster and his friends picked him up and then he died. But the main reason why I'm highlighting Stephen Smith's murder in this video is because 6 years after his murder, whether it was a hit and run or a murder by blunt force trauma to the head, investigators reopened his case. And the reason why they reopened his case is 2 weeks after the murders of Paul and Maggie, they announced they had found new information in regards to Stephen's case that they uncovered during the investigation of the deaths of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh. How weird is that? You're investigating a case, a murder case, a double homicide case, 6 years after someone else was killed, and you find information while you're investigating this double homicide that somehow connects to a homicide that happened 6 years ago? I mean, it's fishy. I'm talking big fishy here, not little fishy. The next death I want to highlight is the death of Gloria Satterfield. Gloria Satterfield was 57 years old when she died in 2018. She was the housekeeper and nanny of the Murdaughs, and in fact, many people have said that she was a mother figure to Paul and Buster. She worked for them for a quarter of a century. On February 2nd, 2018, it was reported that she fell on the stairs of the Murdaughs' property. 2 weeks later, she died in the hospital as a result of her injuries. And again, there's a lot of mystery surrounding her death. She never was able to communicate with family members after she fell. Alex Murdaugh was the one who spoke to investigators, who said after Gloria had fallen down, she told him that she had been tripped by the dogs, but Alex Murdaugh wasn't even at the house the day that Gloria had her accident. And based off of what potentially happened to Stephen Smith, a lot of people are suspicious that with the Murdaughs' power, they might be more prone to covering things up. And as of June 2022, the investigation into Gloria Satterfield's death is now reopened, and her body is to be exhumed so investigators can re-examine it. The third and final death we are going to be covering in this video, which is a lot of death, jeez, is the death of Mallory Beach. Mallory Beach was also 19 when she died. She is also probably the most high-profile death other than Maggie and Paul's associated with the Murdaughs. On the night of February 24th, 2019, Paul Murdaugh and 5 of his friends, including Mallory Beach, were going to an oyster roast, and they decided to take the Murdaughs' boat to the oyster roast. They went to the oyster roast, they were all drinking, and at some point they make their way home. A lot of his friends, or his former friends, have alleged that when Paul was drinking, he had an alternate personality. He became so much of a different person that they called this version of Paul Timmy. That Timmy was violent, he was very controlling, he was very stubborn, and Paul was driving the boat back after the oyster roast that night. A lot of the friends have come forward and said they didn't feel safe on the boat, that Paul was pulling the throttle, and that he was belligerently drunk. The boat crashes and some of them fall out of the boat. Others received injuries. Someone had an injury to the face, another one had to have surgery on their hand. But when they all get to shore, the 5 of them realize that Mallory Beach is still missing. Mallory was found dead a week later. And again, there was a lot of mystery surrounding this case. The night of the boat crash, you can see on hospital footage, Alex Murdaugh and his father, Randolph Murdaugh, are going from room to room, talking to each of the witnesses on the boat, each of Paul's friends, trying to figure out who was driving the boat. They were saying that one of the other friends was driving the boat. Paul's alcohol levels were 3 times the legal limit. Some of the friends reported that that night Paul had been abusive to his girlfriend at the time, had slapped her, had called her very vulgar things in front of all of them while on the boat, and that he refused to let anyone else drive. Paul was later charged with 3 felony counts in connection to the deadly boat crash and pleaded not guilty, and Paul was killed before he was able to face trial. Mallory Beach's family has filed a wrongful death lawsuit, and there was supposed to be a hearing on Alex Murdaugh's finances because he alleged he was broke and he couldn't pay a settlement in the wrongful death lawsuit. That hearing on his finances was scheduled for 3 days after the murders of Paul and Maggie. So the day of the murders of Paul and Maggie, we've got confrontation from the law firm to Alec about him misusing their funds. 3 days after the murders, we have a potential financial hearing on Alec's financial status. So you can see why the prosecution is claiming that Alec murdered his wife and son for some sort of distraction. And that financial hearing for Mallory Beach's wrongful death lawsuit was canceled after the murders happened. So did Alec get what he wanted? As for what's next in this case, once the defense rests, the prosecution will call rebuttal witnesses, then the jury will visit the Murdaugh estate where the murders happened, specifically the dog kennels, so they can get a lay of the land for themselves. Then the prosecution and defense will present their closing arguments, and then of course the jury will deliberate. So what do you think? Do you think Alex Murdaugh is guilty for the murder of his wife and son? Do you think it even matters? Is he going to jail anyway? Did you know all this information about the Murdaugh family? And if you watch this whole video, did it make sense to you? Because I know it's a lot to handle. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, share with your friends, do all the things, and I plan to see you next week.